Alrighty, so I had just watched Hellboy the Crooked Man, which came out on streaming. And let me say, as you can see, right, here, there, I am a big fan of Hellboy. Read, the comic books. I've got quite a bit of Hellboy stuff. Love the Ron Perlman movies. My God. Wish, of course, like everyone said, wish they would have actually made an ending to the trilogy. Of course, we'll probably never get that. But great two movies. Then there was the 2019 Hellboy with David Harbour. Not as good, but okay. People kept saying, it's like the worst piece of shit movie ever made. I don't agree with that. I think it was just okay. Just not as good, obviously, as Ron Perlman's Hellboy. And so when I heard about this one being made and that it's kind of more of a lower budget, I wasn't immediately thinking, "Oh God, this is terrible" because it's low budget. The look of Hellboy, he looks skinnier, and yes, some of the stuff looked very just kind of low budget camera work. But that's not necessarily going to deter me. I mean, Blair Witch Project, hello, fucking found footage made off as like a nothing budget, and look how much money that made. So when people are like, "Ew, low budget," it's like, I mean, it doesn't always mean it's going to be a bad movie. Now, the interesting thing about this movie is they were setting up, at least in the trailer, that it was going to be a really horror-focused movie, really dark themes, all that. So I was curious as that, because there are a lot of parts of Hellboy, the story, that's kind of, obviously very grim, very dark, very, uncomfortable. So it was cool to see that, whereas the first two Hellboy movies, even with the David Harbour ones, felt more like action-adventure fantasy and not really like creepy, unsettling. And to this movie's credit, I will say there are certain scenes that do a good job of being creepy and unsettling. But honestly, what this movie suffers from is this movie is expecting you to already know Hellboy. It's basically expecting you to have either seen one of the previous movies, and it feels like an episode from a TV show. I was like, man, if this would have been an episode of a season of a Hellboy show, this would have been so bad. But it's a movie where it's already just starting out like, oh, we caught this monster, let's bring it back to HQ. Now we've stumbled onto a new mystery. What is this? And it just felt like, especially with the quality of the movie, like such a X-Files supernatural kind of thing. One thing this movie does that is neat is it introduces Hellboy lore that wasn't really spoken about in any of the movies, which is Hellboy's mother and that whole aspect. So I really liked that. Lore accurate. Good for them. But basically, the movie feels incredibly long, but I think it feels that it's shaking because my cat is walking around right here. But it feels too long, but you could say it feels too long, because it's pretty boring, or B, like there's just not enough for a full-length movie. You could have made this an hour-long TV episode, or even just made it in that format, an hour long. It would have probably been great to cut out a lot of that filler and just get to the main meat, because by the end, when things actually start getting interesting, I was like, okay, this is cool. But then it's just kind of bland lead up to that, which is unfortunate. The Hellboy design, I don't think looks too bad. It's weird because Ron Perlman is in a muscle suit in the Guillermo del Toro movies, but there's something about it where it didn't seem so overtly fake. Maybe because Ron Perlman's got a big face. David Harbour's one looked kind of odd, but in this one, it's so obviously like a latex like chest piece that he's wearing. And on some scenes, it looked really, really jarring. And the tail in some scenes is prosthetic, and then on other scenes, it's CGI, just like Ron Perlman's movie. The only problem is you'll notice in shots when they're doing the CGI tail they like couldn't get the lighting and shadow right because a lot of the movie is kind of dark or in like a sunset setting, and so you can almost see like the tail is like lagging like while he's walking. Which kind of leads me into the CGI. The CGI is not the best. Uh, Better in some parts than the other, but there's some parts where you're like, wow, this is so blatant. Didn't really take me out of it, but I was like, whew, man, they really were working with a budget here. It just makes me curious, if they could have gotten more funding or anything like that. And don't get me wrong, there are cool shots. There's a scene later in the movie where he's being flipped around and stuff, and it looks like it was all practical, so I like that. And there's even a scene where he comes busting out of a wall but then gets pulled back and the wall gets rebuilt too because it's all magic and stuff, so I really liked that. And the crooked man, it's like prosthetics, there's no CGI on that, so I can appreciate stuff like that. The horror aspect, obviously, again, I didn't feel like, ooh, this is creepy. It felt unsettling in the first Hellboy movie when Ron Perlman's Hellboy awakens that old Russian zombie ghoul. And you're like, ooh, that's so creepy, and it's like breathing out and like the voice is all crackly. It's like, Cronin was creepy. This movie, when it first talks about the Crooked Man, it's kind of creepy because he's from a distance, and then they show his face, and I'm like, it's cool makeup, but he looks kind of stupid. He kind of reminded me of Leprechaun, if you've ever seen that, Leprechaun in the Hood. But yeah, so, and they just kind of immediately do a close up, and I was like, eh. And when it comes to with most movies, you have a lot of setups and payoffs. And there's a setup that they take like a whole 6 minutes to just jarringly cut to as like a setup for the end of the movie. Because basically early in the movie, they find a thing called witch balls, which are like hex balls. And they do like a weird segment where it just cuts away from the movie, and it's like a witch staring at the screen, and she's like, "You want the ingredients for witch balls? A body of a black cat," and it cuts like to guts on a table, and she's like, "Your hair from here," and she goes like, "eh," and then it's whoosh, on the table. I'm like, is this comedic? What is this weird comedic like quick cut that you're doing? And then it just cuts back to the movie, and you're like, what the fuck was that? And so I felt like it was jarring because they didn't really do that again, except there's a character that they introduced in the movie where it's like a whole ass flashback of him like in a war and stuff. And another thing that just sucks in the movies, I don't believe any of the emotions in the acting. I've personally never met anyone from West Virginia, but I gotta wonder if they all sound like that, because it almost sounded like to the extreme, like woods hillbilly. They're like, "I don't know what you're doing here, mister, but you're in for a lot of trouble." I was like, okay, all right. There's funny aspects, like a kid sees Hellboy's like, "Oh, the devil's here," stuff like that was funny. But there's like this whole setup, like Hellboy and his female like researcher agent, like, oh, does he have feelings for her? And you're like, I don't get that at all in this movie. And there's like a relationship with a guy and like his shapeshifter girlfriend, whatever, and you're like, I just kept going, I don't feel anything, I don't believe the actor like in these feelings. And it was unfortunate because I felt like if it were made better, I would have been like, wow, this is some good emotional payoff. But I felt nothing. I was like, it's so embarrassing, just so bleh. And the secondary villain, which is this witch, I was like, she's not doing anything cool enough, In a movie like this where it's all about magic and illusions and trickery, I'm like, you gotta do that more. Like, make it seem like, scare Hellboy, but making it seem like his skin's ripping off, or that he becomes human. Like, like do a little bit more with the illusional stuff if that's what you're going for. I just didn't, I didn't get it. But the movie ended, and I just kept going, why was this movie made? I ask that a lot when I see a movie, like, why was this movie made? Because it wasn't for money. I don't think they, so like, what is this for? Because you know, at this point, it's like, do we just need to ask Amazon Prime to buy the rights of every freaking comic book and IP so they can make a show? Because I would love a Hellboy TV show. I think the aspect of Hellboy and the BPRD is perfect for a show. Actually, you don't even need Hellboy. Just make a show about the BPRD so you don't have to rely on Hellboy and, you know, suffer from fans being like, oh, not my Hellboy, wee, woo, womp womp. Make a show like Supernatural, X-Files, where it's about the BPRD hunting down monsters or like making friends with monsters. Like, I think that would be a pretty cool idea. And so I walk away from this movie just being like, like I gain nothing from it, and I would strongly recommend not buying it. If you're a Hellboy fan, I guess check it out on streaming, but even that, it's like, why would I do that when I own, you know, the Guillermo del Toro Hellboy movies, and I'd have a much better time rewatching that for the 1,000th time. So I guess that's gonna be it for this movie. It's not the worst movie ever, okay? It's not like dog shit or anything. It's just so boring and so meaningless.